Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Gopi Chana Vallabham Girivardhari Yashoda Nandana Vrajajana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Gopi Chana Vallabham Girivardhari Yashoda Nandana Vrajajana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Gopi Chana Vallabham Girivardhari Yashoda Nandana Vrajajana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jayam Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parvajakacharya Astar Sata Shri Srimad His Divine Grace A.C. Bhakti-yoga Swami Prabhupada Ki Jai Anantakoti Vaishnavrinda Ki Jai ISKCON Founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Grantharaj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai Gaur Premananda. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Sri Sri Guru and Gauranga. Glories to Srila Prabhupada. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Oh, okay. do each word.
Yeah, from the transliteration.
From the transliteration. Okay. We don't break, just as it is right there. Yeah. Yatākshasu mano buddhis tattva drig dvasta bandhanaha astitaha paramam yogam na deham bubude gatam yatākshasu mano buddhis tatvadrig dvasta bandhanaha astita paramam yogam nadeham bubude gatam yatākshasu mano buddhis tatvadrig dvasta bandhanaha astita paramam yogam nadeham bubude gatam yatākshasu mano buddhis tatvadrig dvasta bandhanaha astita paramam yogam nadeham bubude gatam yatākshasu mano buddhis tatvadrig dvasta bandhanaha astita paramam yogam
Asita paramam yogam adeham bubudegatam yatākshasu mano buddhis tatvadrig dvasta bandhanaha asita paramam yogam adeham bubudegatam yatākshasu mano buddhis
asita paramam yogam nadeham bubude gatam yatākshasu mano buddhis tatvadrig dvasta bandhanaha asita paramam yogam nadeham bubude gatam yatākshasu mano buddhis tatvadrig dvasta bandhanaha asita paramam yogam nadeham bubude gatam yata control aksha senses asu the life air manaha the mind buddhi intelligence tatvadrik one who knows the tattvas, the material and spiritual energies. Dvasta bandhanaha, liberated from bondage. Astitaha, being situated in. Paramam, the supreme. Yogam, absorption. Trance. Na, not. Deham, the material body. Bubude, perceived. Gatam, left. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. Translation. Dadichi Muni controlled his senses, life force, mind, and intelligence, and became absorbed in trance. Thus he cut all his material bonds. He could not perceive how his material body became separated from his self. Purport. The Lord says in Bhagavad-gita 8:5, Antakale chamam eva smaran muktva kalevaram ya prayati samad-bhavam yati nastyatra samsayaha. Quote, whoever at the time of death quits his body, remembering me alone, at once attains my nature. Of this there is no doubt. End quote. Of course, one must practice before one is overcome by death, but the perfect yogi, namely the devotee, dies in trance, thinking of Krishna. He does not feel his material body being separated from his soul. The soul is immediately transferred to the spiritual world. Tyaktva deham punarjanma naitimam eti. The soul does not enter the womb of a material mother again, but is transferred back home, back to Godhead. This yoga, bhakti-yoga, is the highest yoga system, as explained by the Lord himself in Bhagavad-gita 6:47. Yoginām api sarveṣāṁ mad-gatenāntarātmanā śraddhāvān bhajate yoginām same yuktatamo mataḥ. Quote, of all yogis, he who always abides in me with great faith, worshiping me in transcendental loving service, is most intimately united with me in yoga and is the highest of all, end quote. The bhakti-yogī always thinks of Krishna, and therefore, at the time of death, he can very easily transfer himself to Krishnaloka without even perceiving the pains of death. Om Jnana-timirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Sri Vasadi Gaur Bhaktavinda. Hare Krishna Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. So, the material world, this planet, sometimes it's called Martyaloka, the planet where death takes place for everyone. Janma mrityu jara vyadhi dukkha dosh anudarshanam. An intelligent person will see that, there are these miseries that are always here: birth, death, old age, and disease. And how to make a solution to those problems is the real problem for humans to solve. Because it's in the human form of life that we're able to understand and appreciate such things, or at least we have a chance to understand and appreciate that everything in the material world has a beginning and an end. So, like people, they try to judge what is a successful nation, or what is a successful civilization. A successful civilization is one that prepares its citizens, the personalities that are within it to become freed from birth and death. That is the actual measure of a proper civilization, not how big the economy is, how strong its military is, how much sense gratification is available to the people. This is not the actual measure of civilization. The actual measure of civilization is there an arrangement for souls, spirit souls in that civilization to attain the perfection of human life, which is being described here, that there is no more return to taking birth again, that one goes to the spiritual level of reality and remains there. So that was the perfection of Vedic civilization. Once the whole world was under the influence of the Vedic culture. We read in Srimad Bhagavatam that Maharaj Parikshit, Maharaj Yudhisthira, their influence spread over the entire planet, and things were arranged in such a way that people could satisfy their material needs and at the same time make progress towards the ultimate goal of human life. So, fortunately in Kali Yuga, things have deteriorated, and the surrounding society is no longer arranged in such a way as to facilitate self-realization and God-realization. And even though the human form of life is considered very valuable, because it's in the human form of life that we can have the intelligence to understand that we're not these bodies, and that the soul should be in the spiritual world, eternally taking part in Krishna's Nitya Leela, his divine pastimes. So things are no longer arranged like that. And therefore we have the Srimad Bhagavatam. If we study the Srimad Bhagavatam very carefully, we see it begins with the sages gathered in the Naimisharanya forest, just at the very beginning, or just before the beginning of the Kali Yuga. And these sages, they're contemplating. They know the Kali Yuga is coming, and that people are going to have very short lives. They're going to be quarrelsome. They're always going to be disturbed. Things are going to be getting worse. They're contemplating what from our vast store of Vedic knowledge are the most essential truths that need to be communicated to the people of Kali Yuga, in other words, ourselves. So they gathered for that purpose to perform sacrifice, and they invited Sutta Goswami to address them, and they nominated one of their number, Shaunaka Rishi, to question him about these things. What are the most essential things for a human being to know? And therefore, and the answer to that question is the Srimad Bhagavatam. It contains the essential truths that people of the Kali Yuga need to know. And one of the truths is that some sacrifice is necessary, especially for those who are inclined to be on the spiritual path. And it means having compassion for others and being willing to sacrifice for them. Like Dadichi, he is sacrificing his body for the demigods. In Bhagavad-gita, Krishna says, Dval bhuta sarga lokesmin daivasura evacha. There are always two kinds of living entities in this world, the suras and the asuras, the devotees, the divinely inspired ones, and then the demoniac, who are simply out to dominate, control, and exploit the material resources. And there's always some competition between them. But the example of Dadichi being willing to sacrifice his body for this cause of the divinely inspired souls in this world was given by Bali Maharaj and later in the Srimad Bhagavatam, in the pastime where he is going to be giving away 3 steps of land to Vaman, Krishna appearing in his form as Lord Vamana, the dwarf Brahmin boy. And Shukracharya, the spiritual master of Bali Maharaj, advised him, no, don't give him the 3 steps of land. It's just a trick. You know, he's going to give it back to the demigods. So Bali Maharaj said, well, you know, if we look at history, you know, the great souls, they sacrifice for the welfare of others. So Dadichi is an example of that. So these two kinds of living entities are always present in the material creation, the divine and the demoniac. The demoniac have a certain philosophy, asatyam apratishtam te jagat ahur anishvaram. They see everything as having no purpose. They think matter is the only thing that exists, and their purpose in life is to dominate, control, and exploit it, because they don't recognize it as belonging to anyone or having any purpose. It's just there for them to try to enjoy and exploit. But Krishna says, aham sarvasya prabhavo mataḥ sarvam pravartate. Everything is coming from him. Everything is Krishna's energy. So the demoniac don't realize that. Ishavashyamidam sarvam yat kincha jagatam jagat. Everything is Krishna's property. We're only allowed to take our share, what's necessary for us. But everything else is to be used in Krishna's service because it's his property. It's like if I go to somebody's house. Say somebody lets me stay in their apartment for a weekend or something to watch it while they're gone. And while they're gone, if I start taking everything, selling the furniture from their house, it's not right. You're forgetting the proprietor, that it belongs to someone. You're just temporarily using it. So this material body is like that. It belongs to somebody. Like you rent a car, you got a rental car. You can't do anything you want with it because it's not yours. You drive it around, dent it up, bash it up. There's going to be problems. So whether we're talking about the material body that we have or whatever material possessions that we have, we should understand that it's the property of someone else. Like if somebody's working for the government, they have access to money and machines and things like that. If they use it for the government purpose, then that's fine. If they're, like they're in some department that's supposed to take care of people, take care of their health or something, and they have their budget and their buildings and their facilities, and they use them for that purpose, then that's good. There's no problem. But if they start taking it for their own welfare, more than their approved salary, then there's going to be some investigation and some punishment administered to that person. So that's also how the material world is arranged. Therefore, it's explained in the Bhagavad-gita. Lord Krishna explains, Yat karoshi yat ashnasi yat shuhoshi dadasi yat. Do it, whatever you do, whatever you eat, whatever you give away or accept in charity, do it as an offering unto me. Tat karushva mad-arpanam. Everything should be done as an offering to Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And Dadichi, he's giving his very life, he's giving his body, which is normally very dear to a person. The average person doesn't want to become separated from their body. So Dadichi is willing to give even his body for the cause of God consciousness. Many people are interested in yoga today, but they don't realize the ultimate purpose of yoga. It's to control the mind. The conditioned soul is ultimately part and parcel of the Supreme Lord. Mamaivam so jiva loke jiva bhuta sanatana. The soul is actually part of God. And unfortunately now the conditioned soul forgets that. Manasastan indriyani prakritishtani karshati. The soul, although it is by nature part of God, part of Krishna, now is struggling with the material mind and senses. And this takes place under the influence of the time factor, which is Krishna. Kalosmin lokachaya krit. That means Krishna is saying, time I am, destroyer of the worlds. So in the material world, we're under the influence of the time factor, and it has a destructive aspect to it, that everything that is manifest in the material world is ultimately destroyed. So if one wants to get out of that position, then one has to control the mind. And the best way to control the mind is through the chanting of the Hare Krishna mantra. And if one practices that throughout one's life, if one, in Bhagavad-gita, Krishna says, or Arjuna says, actually the mind is very fickle, it's going here and there. We have to learn to bring it back to the spiritual subject matter, the holy names, Krishna's teachings in the Bhagavad-gita, the Srimad Bhagavatam, practical devotional service. If our mind is absorbed in those things, if we can do that, then at the time of death, we can keep the mind focused on Krishna. Then Srila Prabhupada is saying in this purport that one won't even experience the pain of death. And it's described in the Srimad Bhagavatam that there is pain at the time of death. It's actually quite intense. But if one is able to focus one's mind on Krishna, Krishna's service, Krishna's name at the time of death, then one can escape the pain of that. So that's what Srila Prabhupada is saying in this purport. And one will be transferred to Krishnaloka, Srila Prabhupada says in the last sentence here. He says that the bhakti-yogī always thinks of Krishna, and therefore at the time of death he can very easily transfer himself to Krishnaloka without even perceiving the pains of death. So that is a very good inducement to practice bhakti-yoga. What time does class go to? Okay. So I think I'll stop here. Anyone have any questions or comments? Yes.
I was just thinking that it's Krishna is so merciful that some bhakti yogi might not always be in a position on their own to be chanting Hare Krishna at the time of death, but the devotees are so merciful that they come and they carry that soul by the chanting. The Maha Mantra takes them out of their body, and you know, it's like we always think, oh, it's just me, but really it's a collection, just like the mycelium that grows under the root systems of trees and plants. And they've done studies and they show how that symbiosis is so powerful in the forest. And so we have this nice sangha of devotional association, and we've seen so many times how the devotees can help their god brothers and god sisters to leave the world in a fully Krishna conscious manner.
Yes, you're correct about that. Tandira Charana Sevi Bhakti Sani Vas. Devotional services in the form of serving the lotus feet of the previous acharyas and the present spiritual master is done in the association of devotees. And that's why Srila Prabhupada created ISKCON, you know, to provide make an association of devotees practicing Krishna consciousness. So that means cooperating with each other and not creating, you know, factions. And you know, Srila Prabhupada often warned about that. Don't let politics and factions kind of disturb the sangha, the association of devotees. And the devotees do desire to help each other in their Krishna consciousness, as you mentioned, at the time of death or when one's weakened by disease or something. So, yeah, you're right. Thank you for that. Anything else? Yes?
I had two questions now. The first one is, what happens to the soul after, when it's leaving its body? How does that process work? Like, what happens at the time of death to the soul? And then the second question was, why is it that these asuras, or like the ones who don't believe in God, are so convince others so easily that, you know, the world was created in such a way, you know, such as the universe was created such by, you know, matter and whatnot?
I don't know if I completely understand the questions.
Or the first one is, what happens at the time of death?
What happens at the time of death?
Yeah.
What happens at the time of death is that, well, we have to understand, first of all, that a living entity has a gross physical body, and it has a subtle material body composed of mind, intelligence, false ego, and also subtle senses. And then there is the soul itself. So the soul has its own form, its own spiritual form, spiritual senses, and it's but under the influence of false ego, that's covered, because that spiritual form, Jivaras Rupahoy Krishnera Nityadas, by nature the soul is meant to serve Krishna, so it has a spiritual form in which it's possible to do that. But because the soul has free will, it can turn from Krishna. And when it turns from Krishna, it can't use its spiritual form for sense gratification. You know, it's only good for one thing, serving Krishna. So, and the soul can't be in the spiritual world because the only thing that goes on there is loving devotional service to Krishna. So there has to be some other place for such a soul. So that's the material world. And by false ego, we identify with the material body. And according to the state of the mind, intelligence, false ego, and everything, we get a gross physical body. But it's, by Krishna's arrangement, it's temporary. So the soul is hooked up to the gross material body in a very complicated way. You know, the subtle senses are wired or connected to the 5 working senses and the 5 knowledge-acquiring senses. So what happens at the time of death is the connections of the subtle body with the physical mechanisms of the gross physical body are cut off, you know, one after another. You know, like at the time of death, you know, the senses gradually shut down, and the connections with the gross physical body are gradually cut off, so that one can no longer act through the gross physical body. You know, so one after another, the connections are cut off, and then the soul with the subtle body is taken. For the materialist, the soul is taken by the Yamadutas to the court of Yamaraj, where they're judged. You know, okay, this is what you did in this life, and for that, you know, your state of consciousness at the time of death, you know, and what you did during your lifetime is going to be judged by and witnesses are there, and then you'll be given assigned to a different type of material body, depending upon the consciousness. So, like the story of Ajamil kind of shows what happens at the time of death. And then also, if you look at the City of Nine Gates chapters of, I think it's the 4th canto, it kind of describes, you know, in a metaphorical way, what happens at the time of death. And so the soul and its subtle body are then prepared for the next body. Yeah, you have to get some training for the next body. The body's like a machine. So when you get a new kind of vehicle or a new type of computer, you have to go through a process, a learning process. Like if you're say I'm going to have the body of a dog in my next life, I have to get some training how it's going to function. But so basically what happens at the time of death is that the subtle body is detached from the gross physical body, and then it's configured for the next body, and you get it. Now that's for a materialistic person or a devotee whose devotional service hasn't quite reached the level. Of course, they won't see the Yamadutas, but they may take another body. Like it's stated that, if one is in a sacred place like Vrindavan or Mayapur or Jagannath Puri, and one creates some offenses there, then one might have to take the body of an animal like a monkey or something like that in that sacred place. Or like Maharaj Bharata had to take a body of a deer. So of course, some pure devotees, they remain in the material world, willingly. They take birth here, out of compassion for the conditioned souls. And what was your second question?
My second question was, how is it that the mass are so convinced that the world was created with an explosion?
How are they convinced?
Yeah, how are they so easily convinced that there's no God, practically?
I don't know if I understand the question. How?
It's okay. I didn't fully think it through, so I didn't really.
Why did the material scientists think that the world was from the Big Bang?
Oh, because they think that science is a game that should be played by certain rules. One of the rules is you can't have any non-material substance. In other words, you can't bring in an idea like a soul, which is not matter. That's one of their rules. And another rule is you can't bring in higher intelligence having anything to do with what you're trying to explain. Can't explain why God did it. That's against the rules. So with those rules in place, they look at what they see in the sky at night, and what some of them observed was a shift in the spectrum of the light coming from stars in the sky. Because if you look at the sky at night, you don't see the stars going away, moving out. Like if there's an explosion, that means things move out. But one scientist was studying the spectrum of the light coming from the stars. Light, according to their view of things, is an electromagnetic phenomenon, and and they also think that, like if you have a certain element, like carbon or something like that, when you burn it, it puts out light of a certain spectrum, or if you look at colors, they have, a different electromagnetic wave that's in a certain part of the spectrum. You have the visible light, and then you've got the infrared and the ultraviolet that we can't see. So you've got red at one end of the spectrum and violet or blue at the other end. So they found that the light coming from the stars, the elements that are burning in those stars put out a spectrum that's shifted from like if you were in a laboratory here on Earth and you took a certain element like carbon or something like that and you burn it, it puts out a spectrum, where the carbon is located at a certain point. But if they see the spectra of the carbon from stars, they think it's shifted towards the red end of the spectrum. It's in a different place than it would be if you were measuring it on Earth. So this phenomenon is, it's also there in sound. Like if you hear, like if somebody has a motorcycle and it's standing right in front of you and they start it up, you hear the sound of the engine, like it's going brrrr. But if they're driving it towards you, by you, it goes when it's coming towards you, the sound is going higher because the waves are coming faster, and then when it's going away, the sound goes down. So they think that by measuring, by seeing the spectrum of an element shifted towards the red and the light coming from the stars, they think that means that the star must be moving away. And if the stars are moving away now, that means in the past they must have been closer to each other. And in the distant past, they must have been all in one place. In other words, if you play this game, with their rules, that's what you get. So that red shift, or the shift in sound, or the shift in spectra, that's called a Doppler effect. But there might be other reasons why the light from stars looks like it is. So, and, you know, they're just really speculating about the whole thing. I mean, they say that the Big Bang took place 13 billion years ago. How do they know that? You know, it's like for 13 billion years, they would say there was no consciousness. There weren't any conscious beings to observe what was happening 13 billion years ago. I mean, they say life, intelligent conscious life, only began at most a few 100 million years ago, and human life, they say, came into existence only a few 100,000 years ago. So for 13 billion years, there was nothing. I mean, how they can speak with any authority about what was happening billions of years ago, when according to them, there was nothing around to observe it. You know, so therefore, we don't put very much stock in their speculations about what they think happened 13 billion years ago when there was nobody around to observe it. And so we accept another source of knowledge, like the descending path of knowledge, which comes from accepting the idea there is a supreme, intelligent, conscious source of everything. And he can communicate, that source can communicate to us what the real story is. And they've got it right partially that universes do expand. But we learn from Srimad Bhagavatam that Mahavishnu is lying in the causal ocean, sleeping, dreaming, and when he breathes out, universes expand from his body. And when he breathes in, they contract back into his body. And we can be confident that that is the actual fact because we're getting that information from the proper source, the person who manifested Mahavishnu and manifests and arranges for him to manifest all those universes. You know, so we're getting that information from a proper source. Anything else? Okay. Hare Krishna. Glories to Srila Prabhupada.